Welcome to Connections and Conversations, an advocacy arena podcast, working to increase civic engagement and strengthen our communities. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode, and I am delighted to have with me today a Canadian journalist that I have been engaging with for quite some time online, and I am just delighted that he was able to carve out a little time to come and talk to our listeners in the advocacy arena community today. So I want to give him an opportunity to say hello, introduce himself, and we'll get started.
Well, thank you very much, Dee. It's a pleasure to be in the advocacy arena, and I do value our online friendship. I'm Geoffrey Johnston. I'm the international affairs columnist for the Kingston Whig-Standard up here in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. The Whig-Standard is Canada's oldest continuously published daily newspaper, and I've been a journalist since the 1990s. It's a rewarding life, and in these troubled times, I think journalism is especially important. So I'm glad we're here and we can talk about journalism.
Absolutely. I think it is very important, particularly at this time. So you told us you've been doing this now for about 30 years. What drew you to journalism?
Well, originally, I'm going to be honest, I wanted to be an academic. I was doing politics, international politics at university, and I had a very serious illness, and it sort of derailed my academic career. And by the time I recovered, the season had passed. And so I decided that I would become a journalist because I could apply many of the skills that I learned in graduate school to journalism and a lot of the knowledge. And one thing led to another, and I became a freelance writer, and I kept submitting, and there was a lot of rejection over time, and there were a lot of lean years, but eventually a little bit of success came my way, and bit by bit, I established my reputation, and now I write for the Kingston Whig-Standard, and I'm also a contributor on radio, CFRA 580 News Talk Radio in the nation's capital of Ottawa, Ontario. And so it's a rewarding career. There's not a lot of money in journalism, I'll tell you that, but there are many other rewards.
Awesome. So, Geoffrey, you do international reporting. Is that what you've always done?
Yes, I've always focused for the most part on international affairs. I began to write in the beginning about Canadian foreign policy because that's actually my background. And then I slowly branched out into other areas. Now, I sometimes write about Canadian affairs. If there's a big issue, I will address it on the national level. But I also have a real interest in international development. And so I write a lot about development issues, about maternal and child health. And I also focus on human rights, international religious freedom, and humanitarian crises, as well as environmental issues such as the climate crisis.
Wow, that's a lot. And those topics, I'm sure, keep you busy, especially globally. Is there any particular area of focus, say climate or other things that you are more drawn to?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there are certain areas that I am really interested in, but we're often driven by the news cycle and what's happening in the world today. So personally, my favorite thing to write about is Canada and Canada's place in the world. But, right now it's hard to ignore what's going on in the United States. So we have to face that. And of course, there is the Trump challenge to Canada's economy and national sovereignty. So we've covered that a lot. Right now, we're writing about the unfolding humanitarian crisis in Gaza. That's a controversial topic, but nevertheless an important one to cover. And I'm sure in the coming days, I'm going to be writing about the upcoming G7 summit, which is going to be hosted by Canada in Kananaskis, Alberta. So that's next on the agenda for me.
Oh, wow. That should be very exciting, as you said, considering the new administration that we have here in the United States. And I know from our conversations that we've had since that happened that things changed for you, your way of reporting and engaging. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So during President Trump's first term, I had to write a lot about the things he was doing, and he was really a chaos agent, to be frank. And when he left office, begrudgingly, after the January 6th insurrection, I decided I wasn't going to write about him anymore. I wasn't going to give him any more oxygen. And I wrote, about what the good works that President Biden was doing. And sometimes I criticized President Biden. And then I moved into other areas such as climate change. But now that Donald Trump is back, it's impossible to ignore him. So I now have to write about the things he's doing. So I've written columns about how he presents a very serious threat to Canada's sovereignty and independence, and also to our economy with his illegal tariffs. And so I'm following that very closely, and I'm also very concerned about the state of American democracy and the rise of, to be frank, fascism in the United States. And what happens in the United States tends to influence the rest of the world. We just recently had an election in Canada, and ironically, Donald Trump helped indirectly to defeat the far right in Canada because Canadians were horrified by Donald Trump's, first month in office. And so Canadians turned away and ended up by giving a strong minority mandate to the Liberals here in Canada. One of the main mandates of the new government is to stand up to Donald Trump. I'm covering that.
Absolutely. And we talked about that, and that's not the only country that kind of helped liberals secure power in elections that maybe were, as you say, not looking like they would go that way or were, hard to call. So while he has hurt us here in America, certainly, and other people abroad in some ways, what he's doing has helped other people to see the danger. So I do think that that's really, really important. I know a story that you recently wrote about caused you to get a lot of threats and just ugly correspondence. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is one that we cannot ignore. And I often write about humanitarian crises. So over the last 2 years, I've actually written a lot of articles about the humanitarian crisis in Sudan. As you know, there's been a conflict in Sudan between rival military factions, and this has led to the declaration of famine in a number of places in Sudan. So I had been writing about that on a regular basis. And I can't just, care about people in one part of the world and ignore a crisis in another. And what's happening in Gaza right now, according to something called the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative that basically measures food insecurity crises and nutrition crises around the world. And they say that Gaza is on the cusp of famine. So I recently wrote a piece about that issue, and I got a lot of pushback from a group called Honest Reporting Canada. It's a registered charity, but it is a pressure group that is very much pro-Israel and tries to intimidate Canadian media. And so they wrote an article about me and my article, and they encouraged their followers to send complaints to my editor. It was a form email, and so my editor received upwards of 600 complaints about the article and about me. And they also encouraged people to send social media messages to me, which I received, and people were calling me liar. It's not a good feeling, but unfortunately, a lot of Canadian journalists experience this, and I had a number of journalists reach out to me and tell me about their experiences. And in tomorrow's Kingston Whig-Standard on Friday, we have another piece in about the humanitarian crisis and how humanitarian aid is being weaponized in that conflict.
The sad thing is that this is important information, and the people who are trying to get it out to us are being targeted. And that's the same thing that is happening here in our country. Tell us a little bit about, as a journalist, we have a free press actually embedded in our Constitution. And the fact that journalists are being threatened, that journalism has kind of capitulated in some ways to some of these extreme right-wing ideologies and people, it is a grave disservice to democracy. And I know that you can see this from abroad. And, I tell you often, it's important. I want to stay in touch with you because as they crack down on our journalists here and they're not able to truthfully report, so people don't know. And, that's a big danger when you have an autocrat taking over. We will be looking to journalists abroad to report on what is happening here. That's a heavy responsibility. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so thank you. These are difficult days for journalists. I think the pandemic actually radicalized a lot of people, and I think it really threw a lot of people into chaos. And I noticed a big change during the pandemic. And I started actually, because I write a lot about, global equity, but also, vaccine access and global health. And I started getting threatening emails and death threats and people threatening to put me on trial at Nuremberg 2.0 or hanging me. And I'd never gotten that before the pandemic. So on that level, something has changed. On the level that you're talking about, in the United States, you really don't have strong public broadcasting, whereas here in Canada, we have the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. In the UK, you have the BBC. And these public broadcasters are essential to journalism because they are pretty much immune to government pressure and corporate pressure. And what I see happening in the United States is you have these big corporate media companies, and there's a lot of media concentration. And they end up by being fearful of the Trump administration because Trump likes to make threats. He threatens to take away the broadcasting licenses of a number of broadcasters. Or if a big parent company has a deal in the works, maybe they will soft pedal their news coverage in their news divisions because of this. And then also what we see in American news is a lot less reporting and a lot more panels. And they do this because it's a lot cheaper just to bring in some talking heads, sit around for a few hours every night and talk about politics instead of actually sending and paying reporters to go out and cover the stories. And I think in the end, this becomes platforming people who should not be platformed, because just because somebody has an opinion doesn't mean that it's of equal weight, and the facts always must trump feelings. And too often we have people on American cable news who are basically spouting rhetoric and their feelings, and they're not actually covering the facts. And that, as a Canadian, is very disconcerting to see. And I see a lot of time American journalists talking about trivial issues, and they miss the bigger issues, and they don't see that their democracy is slipping away, and that's very concerning.
It absolutely is. And I think you really painted a very accurate and complete picture of how our media here is failing us. I would agree with you wholeheartedly. They are not coming to talk to people and going and digging and finding those stories. I see this aspect of news reporting very much being, I call it infotainment, actually, at this point. And it's very much like reality TV. It's, as you say, it's a very inexpensive way to, call yourself news, as they call themselves entertainment. So thank you for that. As we start to wrap up here, again, I want to thank you for taking a little time out because I know you're busy and I know that, you do a lot of research to bring good reporting to us. And when I air the episode, I will share the link to your column and any others that, you suggest that I put in there so that people know how to find your work. And I'd also like them to be able to find you and follow you online at this point as well. Because again, like I said, as our media shrinks, we're going to need folks like you to be honest and report on what's going on here, because an uneducated populace is one that's easy to control and manipulate, and they are doing a fine job of that. So I thank you again for being here with me today, and I would like to give you an opportunity to just share some last thoughts about journalism, what you do, just speak to the listeners about this important issue and also tell us where to find you.
Well, thank you, Dee. And I really do appreciate Advocacy Arena. And this is an important form of journalism. This is new media, and this is the present and the future. My message is this: please support your local newspaper. Newspapers across North America are disappearing. And when they're gone, you lose your local news coverage. You lose the coverage of your local town council. You lose the local human interest stories. You lose the local public health stories. Once it's gone, and you really need that. I think that's the level of government that affects you most at your municipal level. So please support your local journalists. That's really important. You can find me online at the Kingston Whig-Standard, and you can read me at www.thewhig.com, and Whig is spelled W-H-I-G. So as I say, we're Canada's oldest continuously published newspaper, and we plan to be around for a long time to come. And once again, Dee, it's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you. The pleasure has been mutual, Geoffrey, and I look forward to us continuing our conversation and interaction, because I know that we will, because I know that you understand the importance of your job, and I appreciate you being so good at it. So I'm always going to be keeping up with what you're doing and looking forward to that. So wishing you a great rest of the day and week ahead. We'll see you next time. Hopefully we'll have another opportunity to do this.
Thank you, Dee.
Thank you for listening to Connections and Conversations. This is one of many wonderful interviews that we bring to you to help connect you to a larger community of advocates and changemakers across the country. You'll get a glimpse into the various ways people are making an impact in their communities. My hope is that it will inspire you to get engaged in some small way as well. We can't all do everything, but at this moment in history, we can all do something. What are you doing? One of the things you can do is to continue to listen, subscribe, and share this Advocacy Arena podcast. You can also join and support the growing grassroots Advocacy Arena community in other ways. Join our weekly live chats hosted on Spoutable every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Subscribe to our Substack to get great articles on important topics and exclusive access to extended interview conversations. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We've got some exciting programming lined up. And keep listening to our regular podcast episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, subscribe and give us that all-important 5-star review.